doesn't record automatically anymore. For so long, it's been set to record automatically, so I don't even think about it, and now it's not doing that anymore. Hello, Alice's granddaughter.
Go ahead, say hello. Say hello.
Hi.
Hi, Andy.
Thank you.
All right, so the idea of today is to just kind of run through what you're looking for when you're pulling comps, and some of this is going to be how you're pulling comps, in my opinion, kind of whatever the market is doing, and some of this will be what are you doing differently today with what the market is doing, right? So there's two different conversations going on. So what I'd love to do is just push us into the MLS and start going through an example, and have you guys kind of ask questions as we do that. Does that sound like a good plan? Cool. So I will share my screen with you. Okay, so somebody give me the details of a subject property and we'll pull some comps for it. You're going on a listing appointment tomorrow. What are the details? Anyone?
4 bedrooms, 3 full bathrooms, one of which is in the basement, half bath on the main level. Yeah, that's what I've got going on right now. So.
Okay, is it a colonial? Is it a ranch?
It is a colonial, 2-car garage, a solid acre, but it is on the literally top of a hill. it's I don't know how many feet up, but it is a very tall, steep driveway. So
perfect for mountain goats is what I'm hearing.
I mean, way up there, like, you know, different air up there. Yeah.
And what's the above grade square footage on this particular property?
Above grade square footage is like, I think 23, let's say 2,300 for argument's sake.
2,300, okay. So
24.
A 2,400 square foot colonial, 4 beds, 3.5 baths, 2-car garage on an acre, on a hill. And just, I need one other thing. I need to know what town this is in.
It's Stamford.
Okay. Now, because it's in Stamford, so let's pause there for just a second, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of you are. Let me get rid of this a second. Some of you are comping properties in smaller towns, right? In smaller towns, if you're comping a property in, you know, Bethel or in Wilton, even Ridgefield, in Easton, you're not really looking at, okay, where is the property in relation to the entire town, right? Because in smaller towns, even though some people like to wave a flag that certain areas in a certain town are more valuable, for the most part in smaller towns, that's not really all that accurate, right? I can remember a day when the northern part of Ridgefield was determined to be far less valuable than the southern part of Ridgefield. Right, if you were on Nod Road versus Turkey Ridge Estates, well, it didn't matter that the properties were the same. It was less up north, and a lot of that has kind of gone away over time in smaller towns. If you're in larger towns or cities, you may have legitimate reason to need to know if it's in a certain section of town or not. You know, for example, if you're listing something in Norwalk, is it in Norwalk? Or is it in Rowayton? Does Rowayton have a higher price point than kind of the rest of Norwalk? Yes, it absolutely does, right? In the city of Stamford, you have some of those same criteria, right? You have 3 distinct areas. You have Chapin down by the water, you have kind of mid-city, and you have North Stamford. Some might argue the Cove is another little micro section there, right? And so sometimes you need to know where it's at. If you're comping something in Danbury, does the west side of Danbury differ from the rest of Danbury? Yeah, a little bit, right? So sometimes you have to get clarity around where you're actually looking, and that will tell you if you need to focus in your comps on a smaller area. So for purposes of this example, Faye, where is this property located? Chapin, Mid-City, or North Stamford?
Mid-City and specifically Westover, because I think that that matters too.
Okay, so Mid-City and Westover. All right, perfection. There we go. So now you have your, and where are you getting all these details? You getting them from the field card?
MLS, public records. I did not pull the field card
Yeah.
yet.
And so I always encourage you not to rely on the MLS, just as
Okay.
a word of caution, simply because the MLS data is sometimes wrong, right?
Oh, yes, I know.
From,
I already found a discrepancy, so yeah.
so when you're going on a listing appointment, the data you need to confirm is on the field card. So go to town hall, get the field card. If that's difficult to do still nowadays, rely maybe next on vision appraisal if your town is listed on vision appraisal, right? Not all towns are listed on vision appraisal. I don't remember the exact website for vision appraisal, but if you Google it, you can click right through to it, and that will give you most town records. And some towns or cities actually have the assessor's field cards posted on their website. For all the properties I own in Waterbury, I can jump on and just click on a couple of links on the actual Waterbury site and get to the field cards. So anyway, the point is go to the source if at all possible. And if not possible, vision appraisal is probably your next best bet, which is vgsi.com. Chris put it in the chat box for everybody. All righty, so let's dive in and take a look at pulling some comps. Let's go back to the MLS. Here we are. Now, this is a personal choice for me, the next step here. I like to pull everything from here, from the cross-property search. Some of you go into residential, some of you go into the style specific. I like to do cross-property search only because I can access everything I need from this one spot. Right? If I need to pull single family stuff and I need to compare it with condo stuff, or if I need to see how single families and multifamilies are doing, I don't have to go out and come back in again. Everything I need is here. And so I like to just start right here. Now my suggestion to you is to not get crazy with the information you put into the MLS. I think you are better served with your own two eyes and your experience than you are by putting too much information into the criteria section and having the computer whittle things down to only a few. I think you end up missing valid comparables when you do that. So here's what I mean by that. The first thing I'm going to do is start clicking through and coming up with at least a list, starting with where I'm searching, right? So I'm going to be searching. This is the one that Faye gave us. I'll be searching in Stamford. I'll be searching for a single family property. I'll be searching for a colonial. In this particular case, I might start by clicking through to Westover and then broaden that if I can't find 3 great comps in Westover, right? Now, here's part of the discussion. If you're not sure what properties are in Westover or not in Westover, right? If I just ran a list, I couldn't tell you just based on the address if it was in Westover or not, or if it was down in Chapin. If you know those addresses better in the town or city that you're looking to find comps in, you may be able to do that with your eyes and not utilize this neighborhood search over here. And even if you can, just to make sure you're correct, you may want to click into not neighborhood, run it once, and then click into neighborhood and see how it skews it down, just so you can make sure that you're pulling properties that make the best sense. Now, so now we've got single family in Stamford. You're looking for colonials because for the most part, you're comping style to style, right? For the most part. And so here's why I say for the most part. Are there some times where a listing agent might list something as a colonial / contemporary and you want to make sure that you don't miss that? Are there some capes that might be valid comps for maybe a stylized colonial, right? There are certain unique scenarios where you may want to overlap style, but my personal opinion is go style to style first, and if you can't find the 3 best sold comps that you need in a certain time period, within that certain time period, then start expanding. Don't look colonial, contemporary, and cape and antique all for a comp for a colonial, right? You're spending way too much time then. Skew it down style to style, and then let's expand from there if you can't find what you need. The next thing I would do is skew it down by time period. Now, what do appraisers use?
6 months.
Right, so appraisers use 6 months. So you can certainly do 0 minus 180, which would be 6 months, right? I would encourage you, especially with the market moving as quickly as it's moving right now, I would encourage you to see if you can find great comps 0 to 90. Now, 0 to 90 pretty much covers the entire shutdown period, right? And what we know about our shutdown period is that the market was still pretty active. So I'm not concerned about using that data because for all intents and purposes, the market both in April and in May showed up pretty much the same way it did in 2019. So I might start with 90 and then expand to 180 if you can't find 3 great comps, or look at it both ways. Look at it 0 to 90 and then look at it for 4 to 6 months back and see if there's not an excellent comp that changes something further back that you might want to replace one of the comps 0 to 90 with. But I like to pull it a little tighter. This is how I pull comps for the investment properties I buy. I try and get it as tight as I possibly can to really see what's going on and then look a little further out just in case there's something really excellent that I missed by cutting it off at 90 days. The acre of land, the 2-car garage, the 4 bedrooms and the 3.5 baths, for me personally, I'm going to leave a lot of that out. And here's why. Is it possible that you have a really great comp with a colonial that might be 3 bedrooms, same square footage, but it's 3 bedrooms with a den that maybe somebody could utilize as a 4th bedroom? I get the appraisal is only going to be 3 versus the 4 on a real 4 bedroom. But in terms of making sure you have the best comps, if you start with 4 bedrooms and skew out everything else that's less than that, you may have a really excellent comp that you're not looking at simply because it has 1 less bedroom. So I like to leave a lot of that stuff out, and then I like to go here into square footage. Now, Faye said 2,400. For me, I might look 2,000 to 3,000. I might look 22, maybe 2,000 to 2,800, like 400 on either side. I'm not going crazy here, but I'm giving some parameters to make sure that I'm getting continuing to skew a bit. Any questions so far on what I'm doing? It's pretty basic, right? Okay. So for me, looking for comps for Faye, this will be where I'd start. I wouldn't do much more of anything. Right, if you look down here, pop in number of bedrooms at 4+, does it Does it skew anything down? How many, hold on, I have to move some of this stuff out of my way here. So you've got 8 matches, right? If you do 4+ on this, I'm not sure why it goes up. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I hadn't hit tab. So you've got 20 matches here. If I do 4+ on this, it cuts it in half. And I'm not sure I want to cut it in half just yet. I think I want to see what those 3 bedrooms might offer to make sure I'm getting the best comps. Or again, I may do this exercise and say, okay, wow, so if I put 4+ in and see that it cuts it in half, I'm going to look at these 10 first, and then I'm going to take the 4+ out and see which ones I missed, right? Because my guess is if I do 0 to 3 here, I'll get 10 again, right? Because that's the other 10. So I might take a look at it 2 ways. Because I don't know any of these houses, like you guys, when you're doing this, will likely know more of these houses. You've been in more of them. You've seen them on the MLS. Because I don't, and I don't want to make this too lengthy, I am going to put the 4+ in here and only review the 10, and then we can go back and check the other ones out. Normally, I wouldn't do that because in a normal circumstance, I would know better what the inventory looks like, so I can use my eyes to assist. And then there, I'm going to leave it at that and then hit results. So now I've got these 10 properties as potential properties that are comparables. Now, just to remind ourselves, we did not put anything in the neighborhood section, right? So if I want to see how many of those 10 are in Westover, none of them are. Or at least none of them were noted that way, right? That's the other issue with using the neighborhood section, is that sometimes listing agents don't give you that information because it's not required information. And so if you click on Westover and say, okay, well, there's no comp, so I guess I have to just guess at my price, that doesn't work so well, right? Because you may have 2 or 3 Westover comparables in there that the listing agent did not note as such. You can also go back and see if any of the 3-bedroom properties were in Westover, and you can see here that changes it to 2 matches.
Rick, question.
Yes.
Could you have perhaps, if not searched by neighborhood, use the map search and done within 2 miles of the subject property, and then that would have brought you something that was closer to the property, perhaps in that neighborhood?
Yeah, so up here, Kimberly's talking about this, oh, I can't do that way. This section up here, right? So if she's looking for this particular property, instead of clicking on Westover, let's get out of Westover, you could also say within 2 miles of
The subject property address.
Yeah, and so you can put that in there, right? What's a property address in Westover? Just somebody give me something.
66 Carriage Drive. I think that's an address, 66.
Right, so within 2 miles of 66 Carriage, you've got 20 matches. Right, if you click on Westover again, it brings it down to just the 2. Right, so that's another way that you could do that too, because then you could actually take a look at the map, right? If you take a look at the map, whoop, and zoom on in, right, where do we know Westover is? Where do we know Westover is? Here, right? Do I have that right?
Sorry, it's over to the left there a little bit at 11 o'clock.
Oh, sorry. I'm on the other side of Stillwater. Sorry, there we go.
Yeah, right there.
You mean the place that says Westover?
I was going to point that out, but yeah, that would be it.
There we go. Right. So you can see that in Westover, there's not a whole ton. Within 2 miles of Westover, you may have these properties here show up, right? And frankly, 2 miles, I guess, gives you all of these things. Really? That's only 2 miles, huh? Okay. But you get the point, right? So Kimberly's point is sometimes you can use the map criteria if you're looking for something a little tighter. All right. So, like I said, I am going to which are the two in Westover, just to give us an idea, because I won't know. Oh, Stillwater and Westover. Okay, I actually would have known that. See that? I should trust myself from now on. So we're going to take a look at, okay, I'm going to put 4+ back in here, and we're going to take a look at these 10. You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking that what might be cool too is if you do 2 miles of 66 carriage again, what does that do for us? I think it doesn't do anything. Yeah, it doesn't do anything. Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't pulling things that were too far away by not skewing that down a little bit. And again, remember, guys, when you're in the market every single day, you'll look at this list and you'll know where those are, right? I look at those lists and I only know where a couple of those are because I'm not in this market every day. I didn't ever wake up every day and pull information in the Stamford market, right? So now you've got parameters, right? Except these parameters don't really help all that much. I mean, if Faye was really trying to figure out comps, she's got something that closed at 500,000 and something that closed at 775. I mean, it's kind of all over the place, right? So the next thing that I looked to do is take a look at groupings here. You've got 4 properties that sold in the 5 to 550 range, 1 that sold in the 6s, and then 5 that sold in the 7 to 775 range. There's got to be a reason for that, right? And so let me move the photos of you all. Hold on. And so you can see over here on the right-hand side of the screen, and if you can't see on the right-hand side of the screen, you can take your mouse or your cursor and hold it over what I'm showing you. It should give you a little hand, and if you click on the mouse button, it will grab the screen and you can move the screen I'm showing you around on your computer in case you can't see the whole thing. And so then I might take a look over here to say, okay, well, we've got 2 here that are like colonial splits. Well, colonial splits are usually splits that the listing agent wanted to come up when somebody pulled a search for colonials, right? So I might already say, okay, well, that one's probably not going to be such a hot comp. I might look at it, but that's already giving me a head scratch here. Do I have... Sorry, I can't move my screen. Oh, there we go. Do I have any antiques that pulled up? Right. So I've got this one. Colonial Victorian was probably a good indication. Built in 1895. Well, Faye didn't say this was an antique, right? Or we would have looked for antiques. So now we're getting rid of that one. Just kind of continuing to skew back and forth what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Now, in case you didn't know, one of the things that you can do, sorry, I keep seeing all your faces, which is awesome, but I can't see my screen through your faces. So what you can do is you can then get rid of the ones, if you select all, and I decide that this one and this one are not going to remain on the list, I can unclick them and then click on Refine and Narrow at the bottom, and it'll get rid of those 2. So now I'm just left with these 8, right? And so as you're going through saying, you know, this one's not so great, this one's not so great, this one's not so great, you can just kind of keep going over here and unchecking the ones that aren't great. And in the Refine section, you can click Narrow so that you're only left with the ones that you want to see. Perhaps you knew that, perhaps that was a new, fun, exciting tidbit. Now, So now I want to know what the story is here, right? If we're looking at land, Faith said there was about an acre of land. So 3 of these have land. One of them has almost land at 0.7 here on Woods End. The rest of them are all smaller lots, right? So it's going to give us some indication perhaps of where they're located, right? These are probably located outside of Westover, and these may be more comparable. Total square footage, you've got this anomaly here, right, at 3,500, and that's going to include, you can notice this is above grade square footage, but this one has over 1,000 square feet of finished lower level space. Might that be why, part of the reason why it sold for so much higher? Perhaps, right? I might want to take a look at it and see what the story is, but it may not be comparable because of all this extra square footage. So let's just, for argument's sake, right, say that one because of the square footage is now also not a great comp, right? And so now I'm left, you see how we're just kind of narrowing and narrowing? Now I may open them up and say, okay, so let's take a look at these, right? Is Faye's house updated? Like, when was it built? What's the assessment? These are all things that I wouldn't necessarily skew down by, but I would know the information, because at some point, as you're starting to look at these individually, you're going to need to figure out what's relevant and what's not, right? So here you have assessed value. Again, not an apples to apples comparison in almost any case, and yet good as a secondary indicator. Year build, again, secondary indicator. Here, just so you realize, there's 2,500 square feet. 1,464 of that is located in the basement. That doesn't look like an add-on to me, right? Because you do have a relatively, no, that can't be. That's got to be extra there. So here's the other thing with pulling comps when you're working with square footage. There are so many different ways to put in this square footage and still get past the AI that's checking against town records, that you really have to understand the properties themselves to know how it relates to the square footage. And I may be taking a look now. All right, so what's the deal with this property? All right, it presents well, looks nice, not a whole lot of land, not a big yard, kind of a whatever kitchen, right? And so now Faye's going through saying, how does this presentation compare to mine? Right, and she may say, oh, you know what? Bathroom's dated, kitchen's dated, this is not really a comp to my property, to the subject property at all, because I have everything in my client's property. They've updated everything. So you may move on from this one. Oops, crap. Sorry. Who's got questions? No one's asking any questions. I'm just going on and on and on here. That's not the point. Anybody have questions so far with what I'm doing? Comments, concerns? Making sense?
Making sense. You can unclick Woods End because I sold that house. That one was bank owned and needed all the work. So you can unclick that one too, because similar to the last one.
Yeah, and so I'm glad you mentioned that, Faye, because let's talk about bank-owned property. I'm going to unshare my screen for a second to talk about this. Let's talk just a smidge about bank-owned properties. Are bank-owned properties comps that appraisers will use? They are, right? They are comps that appraisers will use. And so you have to be really cautious when you're pulling comps at least for discussion purposes, some of these properties, because I see people do that a lot. They look through and say, oh man, that was a short sale. That was a foreclosure. It was in terrible shape, right? The fact that it was a foreclosure or a short sale in and of itself is not a reason to exclude it. Sometimes short sales or foreclosure properties serve to pull the comparable value of home in the neighborhood down, and that's just a reality. So I would hate for you to use comps that are up here. Faye, I'm just going to mute you for half a second. I'll come back to you in a second. I would hate for you to use comps that are up here only to sell the house and have the appraiser come in and say, well, but there are these two properties that actually are geographically close and make sense statistically. They're not necessarily saying, oh, whoops, short sale. So it sold below value. It sold for what a buyer was willing to accept for it, and what the seller said yes to. Even if there was a third party who said yes to it, the seller said yes, and the buyer was willing to pay, and it was a lower number than perhaps what is specific. If it's condition based, that's a slightly different story. And yet, just because it's a foreclosure or a short sale doesn't necessarily mean it comes off the list right away. So just be cautious around that. Sorry, Faye, go ahead.
Okay. Oh. Yeah, that's what I was getting to. I was saying because of the condition of it, it was obviously vacant, and then all of the appliances were missing. Then mold got into it, and it's not, because of the condition, it's not anywhere near a comp for what I'm trying to figure out right now.
Cool. Right, so we narrow that sucker down. And so now we're left here, right? And so we're slowly getting rid of all these ones in the fives, right? And we're left more with properties that are in the high sixes to low sevens, right? And so now does it make sense to automatically exclude the lower one and the higher one? No, I don't think so, because sometimes the extremes, the bookends, are great comps. Right, and so you get yourself down to a spot where you're literally just walking through each of these properties to say, is it comparable? Does it look like what my property, the property I'm going to represent, has to offer? I think pictures are important. I think descriptions are important. You need to read through if you haven't been in these houses. Make sure that you're reading through this. Now, don't make all of your decisions based on this. Based on these remarks, mostly because, why do you think? Who wrote those remarks?
Listing agent.
The agent.
Exactly right. Right. So it's always going to say how wonderful it is. So you can't be sold on that, right? For factual information, right? If it says new roof, new driveway, new front walk, that's factual information that is helpful, right? Or may be helpful if it says, brand new updated kitchen or whatnot, and they don't have pictures of that. So that's how you would use that. But I would be just cautious. Don't get sucked in based only on the remarks. What other questions do you have?
Well, the land should be somewhat close to that 1 acre. The others are very small acreage. What do you think?
They are, and here's what I will say. Again, knowing that this is just our example here, these properties may be comparable with smaller land. What I have found over time is that land in and of itself is one of the last things one will use in terms of comping things out. One of the very last things. It is very possible that one of the best comps for phase property that has phase listing potential that has an acre of property is one of these on a third or a half based on the actual house. I've seen people go down the path of, well, this has 2 acres of property, so I have to find comps that have 2 acres of property. You'll drive yourself nuts that way. Land is one of those things that It's appealing to some people. It's less appealing to others. Appraisers might make small adjustments for it, but they're not making huge adjustments for it. The only time that land comes into play in terms of value is if you have enough land that you could split off a building lot, right? And so if all of a sudden we're in a 2-acre zone and you have 4 acres of dividable land, well, now all of a sudden the land kind of crawls into the conversation. If you have a property on 1.5 acres in a 2-acre zone, and you have a property on 3.5 acres in a 2-acre zone, I'm not necessarily sure and everything else is comparable. Let me state that. And everything else is comparable. You're not necessarily adding extra value to the land because it's kind of just, it's privacy land. It's more mowing to do. It's more to pay taxes on, right? It's not always a positive. And so there's not necessarily extra value there. And sometimes sellers want to get confused about that, to say, well, I have that awesome woods in the back. I get it. But the best comps to your property also back up to that same woods. They just don't pay taxes on 3.5 acres. They pay taxes on 1.5 acres, right? So you got to balance it out. Again, if it's subdividable, that's a different conversation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Rick, this isn't so much a question as an observation. I cheated ahead and looked at the map, and I noticed that some of these properties aren't in Westover.
Yeah.
And so I guess a word of caution is whoever listed it, either listed it incorrectly or somehow the algo didn't pick up that 77 Ripwam is not in Westover.
Well, and here's the reason why. We didn't
You took it off.
Right, we ran the search without it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Right.
I didn't realize you clicked it off. Okay.
And so now that we've kind of got things down to a few properties, if it were me, I would want to come back and extend this. I now want to see, like, what did I miss 90 to 180 days out? What properties did I miss because I only did 3 months? Because if you remember, we only did 3 months. And so there are 6 more properties that might be something to look at. How many of them are in Westover? Well, still 0, but okay. Does anything ever sell in Westover? Or is this just small for Westover?
No, Westover's in demand.
No,
Yeah.
I closed a house 2 months ago in Westover. Should have come up on this.
It should have, because I'm trying to go by what I did, and I'm trying to remember what house. 2 or 3 came up when I did it by, as Kimberly suggested, within a mile or 2 of the subject property, and then I always start with the 180, and then some. I didn't do it by the square footage, I don't believe.
Yeah, so maybe what we're seeing here in this case is you need to pull out some of that square footage. That's why I asked, is this a small property for Westover?
I mean, it varies, so it's not a tiny house by any means, but.
All right, well, see, 127 is a little much. So if you go back 6 months, use Westover,
And Colonial.
in 2 miles of whatever, right? You've got now 14 properties. Notice if I put back in the 2,200 to 2,800, it brings it down to 1. So what the issue that was causing us a problem was the square footage. Right, so if you're not seeing what doesn't make sense, play around with it a little bit. I would rather take the square footage out, see these 14 properties, and then visually start to go through them. Right, and you can see here, above grade square footage, you got 2,000, 2,000, 26. Now you're huge, right? 44, probably not a comp. 34, probably not a comp. 51, probably not a comp. I mean, you see the size of some of these properties. So
149 Canfield is right next door to my house, and that's a big house. That
Where's-
just sold. 149 Canfield Drive.
oh, here we go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's huge. Wow.
That is a big house. It just sold.
Mhm.
Right.
Everything's selling right now.
Yep. Everything.
It's unbelievable.
It took a long time. It started out with 2 other agents over $1 million. He took a loss.
So thank you for saying it started out, because that's the other thing I want to
Yeah.
I want to just show you real quick. Once you narrow things down to 5 or 6 of them, as you're trying to get down to the best 3 sold comps, if it were me, I would also take a peek just at the property history and see what the, as Alice said, this started at $1,175,000, right? Looks like. Where's the date on this? Oh yeah, started at $1,175,000 last August, right? Went down to 1,125, 1,050, then 995, then finally took an offer and sold at 960. But it took almost a year for that to happen, 10 months. Right, that's something I would want to know. If I'm going to use this as a comp, well, I want to make sure that the 960 number is what we're using in terms of a comparable. And as we have conversations with our sellers, we know the history of this particular property, so that if all of a sudden they decide they want to start looking at numbers like this, 1,150,000, you can dive right into that to say, let's take a look at 149 Canfield, because it's a really great comp for your property. And they made the mistake of listing way over where it should have been. Didn't get an offer until they came down to 995. They did that in February, which means they needed when did it go under agreement? So a month later, right? So this was before the shutdown. They still needed 30 days to find a buyer at 995 and settle on 960. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, can you see how doing something just over $1 million may cause you to have months and months and months of no offers, instead of price pointing it right at 999, we get you something fast.
Yep.
Because fast typically equals more money in your pocket.
The funny thing about that house, if I can interject, is the house across the street is also for sale, and they listed it at 99999, and then within an hour of that being listed, 149 Canfield was reduced to 995.
Yeah, imagine that. Funny what the competition will do for you, right?
Isn't it that?
And so let's talk a little bit about, let me turn this off a second. Let's talk a little bit about what are you doing today with comps, different than you might have been doing a month or 2 ago, based on current conditions. Are you still looking for the best 3 sold comps in the last 3 to 6 months?
I think yes, but also what the competition is doing, because Alice just mentioned that, what's happening in this last day or two, what just came on, because it's just going so quickly. Everything's going so quickly.
Yeah, and so I've heard a lot of people say lately that the comps say this, but we're adding 50,000. The comps say this, but we're adding 75,000. We're adding 100,000, because you never know what those New Yorkers are willing to pay. I will tell you that I do not recommend that. I think that's a really bad idea. And here's why. Nobody knows what the New Yorkers are willing to pay. And New Yorkers, yes, they're New Yorkers, but many of them don't have endless wads of money. And these properties, for the most part, still need to appraise, right? Or you run into the second round of issues. And so I think you have to be really cautious around the anything goes version, right? I'm looking around. There were a couple of you who were around in 2004, 2005, right? And that was an anything goes type of market. And it ever since the shift of 2008 into 2009, right? I've heard people say, oh, gee, I wish I was in the business back in 2003, 4, and 5 when things were flying off the shelves. guys, it was a different kind of hard, right? It wasn't as attractive as sometimes it sounds, right? The game was a different type of game, and the comps it was hard to keep up with the comps. So pricing became this weird kind of looking ahead. And what people started to do instead of root things in reality is they started to do that, add 25, add 30, add $50,000, and let's see what happens. What we learned very quickly was that that's not sustainable, right? So even if you have a one-off success with that kind of strategy, the banking system is still looking for some kind of foundation that they can draw a line under or circle and say, you know what, if we have to foreclose on this property, these are the comps that justify what we will lend, right? So be careful about the anything goes mentality. I think it's a dangerous place to go, and it's not justifiable yet, because we haven't been in this long enough to say it's justifiable. And it's really difficult to come on the other side and appraise those properties.
I think your buyers today, even though they are coming from New York and they're pretty savvy, they're not going to pay up too much. Because I'm working with New York buyers. As a matter of fact, fingers crossed, my closing is happening as we speak. They know what they're looking for, and they bid under what the asking price was, and we had a compromise. And you know what won them the bid? The fact that they were willing to close today before the new taxes and new tax rates went up in July. And that was how they got the house.
Love it. Love it. What else, Dee?
I have a question about shows and deposits, because that's what I've been keeping a close eye on. So I wanted you to address that. And also, so I'm going on a listing in
20 minutes.
Yeah, about that. Yeah, you know me. And they bought in 05. So, and you know who they are. I'll talk to you later. Anyway, she and I are in agreement on the price. It's the husband who wants to up it because of this market. So we got to pull back the reins, if you know what I mean, on him, because he wants to up it because knowing things are going, and we're not going to let him. So, but that's also what's happening. So if you could address shows and deposits, because that's and how we can or can use it and not use it. Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because it's definitely in a situation like we're dealing with today. I look at shows and deposits as a measure of what I like to call velocity, like the velocity of the market, right? It's trending data. It's what's been happening more recently. And the way I would use it is pull it, but know in that particular price range, count with what's going on in that town, in that range. Are things moving really, really quickly? Is there a shortage of inventory, right? Your shows and deposits versus your actives, right? If you start to do ratios between shows and deposits versus actives, you get a percentage of that town's or that price range's inventory that's currently unavailable to buyers, right? Leaving you with just the actives. Those are kind of fun ways to use deposits and shows. And I think the simplest answer I could give is if the velocity is strong with shows and deposits, and you're talking about kind of bracketing this property, well, that might allow sellers to go towards the higher end of the bracketing, right? It's not unlimited, obviously, all the way up here. You still want to keep them in the brackets, because the brackets are there for a reason, right? It's like the thing that comes over you when you're on a roller coaster, right? It's there for a reason. The floor is there, and the thing that comes over you is there for a reason. It kind of brackets you in the roller coaster so that as you're going through the ups and the downs, you don't fly off the roller coaster. I think that's a valid analogy to use with a seller, is that we the floor is there to make sure that you stay up here, but the strap that we're going to put over your shoulders, that top bracket, that's to make sure that because we might go over that hump and come down again real fast. And if you don't find a buyer as we go over that hump, you could fly out into space, and then you're just kind of up here and no one's paying attention to you. So I like the velocity as a means of helping them move within the bracket, and shows and deposits, I think, do that. The other thing to remember is the market, right? And for those of you who have done this for any period of time, my guess is you will agree with me. The market itself will correct itself. It's impossible to undervalue a home. It's even more impossible in a market that's moving quickly, right? Because when there are more buyers and there's scant inventory and people are kind of clawing for things, if you come on where the comps say you're going to come on and then allow people to bid it up, there's more validity to an appraiser than if all of a sudden you just are out here and you manage to catch that one errant buyer who falls in love, right, is buying with their heart, not their wallet. Trust me, those are the old days. People don't do that anymore, right? They buy with their wallet. There's way too much data online for them to not investigate what the property is worth and make decisions based on what makes sense. And so I would prefer to have a conversation with a seller that walks them through that walks them through the idea that if in fact the market is moving fast enough to have your home sell for more, we'll know that, and we'll typically know it pretty quickly. Don't. It's the whole script of, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, do you know the difference between negotiation and competition? Allow me to explain, right? Negotiation is what we sometimes build a cushion for, right? We're going to move the number up here to build in this conversation that we might have to negotiate. Instead, if you get rid of that negotiation cushion and price the property here based on what the market data actually speaks to, and again, maybe a smidge higher because you can go to the high end of that bracket because of the shows and deposits that you're going to use for the velocity determination. Now you've got people who see value in your property right away, and if there's more than one of those people, that's when people compete for your home. I'm curious, do you think competition or negotiation better serves your bottom line?
Competition.
Because that's the question, right? And the answer is 100% what Dan just said. Competition better serves your bottom line than negotiation at any given moment in time. When you have more than one person who wants it, or one person who wants it so badly they're willing to compete with people who aren't even making offers yet, because now you have a worry price, right? People are worried that if they don't leap and leap quickly and maybe offer a little more than they would have if in fact they weren't worried. See how it works? Any other questions on choosing comps? Comments, concerns, things you've noticed? Yeah, Chris.
Question, Rick. So how do you advise or do you not advise a buyer in a multiple offer scenario on how much above ask to send in?
Yeah, great question. And so my strategy for that was as follows. So tell me the scenario. Do you already know there's at least one more offer when you're writing this offer?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had a conversation with the agent, but it's posted on the MLS, highest and best due by X day and time.
Got it. So it's likely, and we'll just assume based on Chris's question that he now knows there's at least one other offer, and when he calls the listing agent, he confirms that there are already two, and his would be the third, right? Or fourth or fifth, depending. The script that I used to use with that is this. So Chris, knowing that there are multiple offers on this property, experience tells me that in the mix, there will likely be someone who comes in at the asking price, someone who comes in below the asking price, and most of the rest of the offers will be above the asking price.
Right.
I'm curious, which one of those do you want to be? So that's the first thing you have to do. So just play with me, Chris. Which one do you want to be?
I wanna be the winner.
So you want to be the winner. Okay. And so if you remember back in our consultation, one of the things I told you that I was kind of really good at was being the winner in a multiple bid scenario. If you also remember, the other thing I said is that sometimes, and this is never the go-to strategy until we're in a scenario like this, sometimes in order to be the winner, you do have to spend more money. And so the way I want you to look at this is this. If you want to be the winner, you have already determined that you're not going to be the person who's at the asking price, and you're not going to be the person who's below the asking price. Do I have that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're going to be one of those people above the asking price, the way I want you to look at making that decision is this way. Every dollar that you choose to spend over the asking price, you are buying yourself insurance to be the winner. And people's tolerance for risk is different. And so at the risk of me spending your money, I'm going to turn that back over to you. How much insurance do you want to purchase over and above the asking price to make sure that you come out the winner?
I don't know, 10,000?
$10,000. Okay. So that's $10,000 of insurance. So we're at 500,000 is the asking price. You're now at 510. Chris, let me ask you this one more question. If in fact the listing agent, if I come back to you after the listing agent tells me at 6 o'clock tonight that your offer wasn't chosen, is there any additional money that at that moment in time you're going to kick yourself and say, you know what? I should have really gone all out for this particular property. Is there any amount of money that you're currently leaving on the table that might win you the house that you should put on now that you're saving? Because we likely don't get a second bite at this apple.
Yeah, I think another 10 would be it.
Another 10. Okay. And so you're saying you're purchasing $20,000 of insurance.
Correct.
Cool. So at 520, the other thing I want you to be aware of is that at 520, we may have a slight struggle with an appraisal. I want you to freak out about that if that happens, right? And here's what that means. It means that the appraiser might come in and say they can find comparable properties right up to around 510 or 512, which leaves a gap. Are you in a position to close the gap and bring a little bit more money to the closing table if in fact the property doesn't appraise and you can only take out 80% of a slightly smaller number? Are you going to be able to bridge that gap?
I would be able to.
Okay. And will you be willing to?
Yes.
Awesome. So knowing that you're willing to close that small gap if we need it, and you're willing to buy $20,000 of insurance over and above the asking price, should we write it up that way and have me go to town?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. That's the conversation I would have. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Very helpful.
Right, and so the other version of that, when you're trying to figure out how much over, right, is start taking a look at some of the other comps. Try to root it in some sense of reality, right? So if Chris said, for this $500,000 house, I want to buy $75,000 worth of insurance, I've also seen that backfire. I've also seen somebody go too high over and it freaks the sellers out, because now they're certain they're going to have an appraisal issue, and they're certain that tomorrow morning Chris is going to wake up and say, what on earth am I doing? and back out of the deal. And now some of their other offers have moved on to something else, or they're upset that they didn't get chosen the first time. So it is a balancing act. But I think if you first and foremost allow them to pick the number. Don't tell them I would go in $20,000 higher. Because if what they find out afterwards is that everybody else was at 502 and they paid 520, right? Then they're upset with you. And if they lost it because it closes at 525 and you told them 520, well, then they're irritated with you as well, right? So have them build it based on some kind of conversation like I just modeled. And at the end of the day, there's not really a right answer to that, because sometimes you're just blind. The other thing to remember in a scenario like that is escalation clauses. If your buyers so choose, you could always say, our offer will be $10,000 higher than the closest verifiable offer, up to $525,000. So that means you still win right up until another offer at 524, if they're basing things on money, right? You win if the closest offer is 505 with a 515 offer. If the closest offer is 516, you win at 525 because it's 10,000 over, capped at 525, right?
Right.
And yes, there are some listing agents who will tell you that that's illegal. It's not illegal. There are some listing agents who will say the sellers don't want to address an escalation clause. They want a number from the buyers. The sellers have a right to say, I'm not interested in an escalation clause, because some listing agents advise sellers that it's either illegal or it's confusing or it's cheating or whatever. It's none of those things, and yet sometimes you're up against how the listing agent feels about it, right? You are better served, rather than fighting with the listing agent about the desire to use it. If it gets shut down, go back to the buyers and say, look, the seller's not interested in an escalation clause, so you're gonna have to pick a number and go strong with a number. And then maybe you have the conversation about buying insurance or whatever. So I know we're down a bunny trail, but does that answer that question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Cool.
Thought it would be difficult and just like you said, they'd be upset with you no matter what. If you tell them an amount you felt, because I mean, like you said, you're blind a lot. Like, who knows what someone's going to offer?
Yeah. And I will say that in almost 21 years of real estate, holy crap.
You're not that old, Rick.
Apparently I am. So is anyone else longer than 21? Because I think Dee, you and I are the same.
I just said that we're the same. I'm in the
Yeah.
office with Ninka, so that's why I'm like this.
Got it.
We're the same.
Alice, how long have you been doing this?
Since 2006.
Okay, all right. I think Dee and I are the old timers on this call today.
That was the second time around.
Ah, okay, there you go. And you had how many years before that?
Probably 2 or 3.
Okay, all right. So you're right up there with us.
Yep.
All right. So what was my point in that? Oh, the idea that when there's 2 offers, somebody is at and somebody is below the list price. So you have to pick kind of who you want to be and if you want to buy insurance. And if there's multiples, that someone is at, someone's above, and someone's at, someone's below, and the rest are typically above. But there is no science in that. That's just experience converting itself into a script that works most of the time, because most of the time what I just said is 100% true, right? It's not always true. And yet in fast moving markets, which is where I started to kind of gather that information and put that all together, I have found that for the most part, those statements are pretty accurate. So anything else on pulling comps? I know we're over time. Remember this when it comes to pulling comps. It shouldn't take you 5 hours to pull your comps, right? It's don't get too crazy about them, right? It's easier than that. And don't pull them in 90 seconds either, right? It takes more time than that, right? So spend time getting real clarity around the best properties that make the best sense to offer as comparables, regardless of what that says to the seller. Don't make the mistake of knowing that the seller would like the property to be $700,000 and get pulled towards properties that are higher when what you're really seeing is that the property is in the low sixes, right? Trust the data, because the appraiser doesn't care what the seller wants. And so I'm just cautioning you, be careful. That's why typically for me, I like to when the seller wants to start telling me what their numbers are. I know it's a pre-qualification question that we even teach. I don't love knowing what their number is, at least not until I'm already done with my work. So I sometimes do preliminary work, then have my first meeting with the seller where I might ask that qualification question, what are you thinking? But I already know based on the prelim work that I did that we're talking about low sixes, and if somebody's looking at low sevens, now I have some work to do.
Can I just share a story with you real quick?
Of course.
My neighbor on the other side of me decided to sell their house, and it's a large house. And based upon my comps, I gave them a number, and they had called in, I think, like 6 other agents. Another one who lives on my same street is also an agent. Anyway, long story short, they told me that the way they were going to pick their listing agent was they were going to throw away the high and throw away the low and go with somebody in between. Wow. I lost the listing because he said that my price was low. And I was pricing it off the house next door to me, which just sold for $960,000. So I'll be interested to see where it does end up selling.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that story in and of itself is part of the reason that we strongly suggest that you don't bring a price in, right? Because some sellers do exactly that, right? They stamp the number on your forehead and they line everybody up. And whether it's get rid of the high, get rid of the low, go with the middle, or more often than not, most sellers who line up agents by stamping their numbers on their forehead go with the high number, right? This particular person went with the middle number. I will tell you that there is not a seller that exists right now that could get information out of me before they gave me the information that their interpretation of the data. I am more than happy to walk them through the data, but if they're not choosing their listing price, I am not giving it to them. I'm not giving them a range. I'm not giving them a number. I'm diving them back. I'm pushing them right back into the data, the specific comparable data that we've pulled, and asking them more questions to pull out of them what they believe, right? And so one of the things that I would encourage every one of us to practice more and more and more are those questions. What questions do we continue to ask? What questions do we ask when they say, look, you know what, Alice, this seems like you're playing games with me. I asked you here because I need to know a number from you. You're the professional. And you keep asking me. I don't know the answer, right? You have to be prepared for those scenarios and ask another question. It's kind of like a game, right? The first person who blinks by not asking a question and giving that number loses. Because I've watched it happen. It happened to me over and over and over again, right? Until I made a vow. I took a vow and said, never again, never again, right? I'd rather say, you know what, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, it is clear to me that you are totally frustrated. And it kind of, I think that part of that frustration is aimed squarely at me, And I get it. I get it. And I apologize. I apologize that you weren't prepared to really get down and dirty in the weeds with me and make this decision yourself tonight. However, you do see that as the owner of this asset, you are the only person who gets to make this decision. What I find is that oftentimes when sellers get frustrated like this, it's because they're struggling with what the data is telling them, or there's a struggle in the interpretation of the data. I'm curious, are either one of those things happening for you right now? And they may say, you know what, I don't understand what these things are saying. That's usually a lie, but okay, great. So let's dive back in and go through the data one more time. Or when you ask that question, sometimes they say something like, you know what, I'm unhappy with what the data seems to be saying. I get it. I get it. Trust me, I own property in Fairfield County just like you, and I'm a little disappointed myself, right? And so I'm curious, over and above your disappointment, if you were just being graded on a test in school and we had to write an answer in the blank based on the information we just went through, what would that answer be for your property? I'm not holding you to it. I'm not saying put it on for that, but I'm saying your interpretation of our discussion and this data, what's that answer? Because at some point, they will give you the right number. They'll give you the right answer. And then once they do,
You're free.
you get to utilize that information, because now they didn't list with you because of their own number. Like, what does that mean? So now you get to not leave the property because they've already come up with their number. Great. So now that you've chosen that number, is there any reason why we shouldn't just move ahead? And now you close.
Excellent.
Right? And oftentimes, even if somebody else gave them a higher number, they may throw that out. Well, you know, so-and-so at Berkshire Hathaway said we could list for $699. I get it, right? Opinions are like belly buttons, right? Everybody has one. And so I'm curious, based on what we just reviewed, where do you think that Berkshire Hathaway agent got the number that they put on the table? Can you justify that number based on the information we just went through? Well, no. Yeah, and that's my concern, because if you can't justify it and I can't justify it, how is a buyer, their agent, or their appraiser going to justify it? Can you see the difference between someone's opinion and interpreting facts and making a decision based on interpreting facts? Which do you think serves you better? But, and again, this is not necessarily script worthy, and yet what I'm trying to model for you is an ability to just keep asking questions, right? Because the more you turn it back and keep asking questions, the closer you get to a truthful conversation and a partnership conversation. Instead of them sitting on one side of the table and looking at you saying, okay, go, show me your whole deal. Do your dog and pony show for me. And I'm assuming that will end up in a number, and I'm going to parade 3 other people through. Ugh, who even wants that? Trust me, I've watched what we do. You don't need to see that 3 times. Oh my stars. It's boring enough the first time when we do it. So we just have to close faster and help them understand that the information doesn't change based on the agent, because the data is the data, the facts are the facts, the comps are the comps.
What about, I just have a question, this is Anne.
Yes.
What about time frame? So what if for some reason they're very skeptical and they're saying, are you willing to sign, are you willing to take the listing for 3 months? Is that something?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Anne. Are you willing to take the listing for 3 months? I'm going to end on this. Some of you know my opinion about this. For those of you who don't, buckle in. Right? My opinion is that no one should get more than 3 months of my time. My opinion is that I should be good enough at what I do that when I walk in and have this conversation, we come to an agreement about what number gets the job done, where I don't need 6 months. I'm only offering you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, 3 months of my time. If it's not sold in 60 to 90 days, I'm going to release you to somebody, because clearly now we're not on the same page. We're not operating in partnership, right? This isn't about me doing a bad job. It's about the seller making the right decision to get the job done, because they're the only person who can make that decision. So my opinion is that we should all be moving our businesses to a conversation that says, so Mr. and Mrs. Seller, here's how I work. We will have a conversation around all the numbers and how that looks. And when we make a decision together about the best number that will cause your property to sell, we will sign an agreement for 90 days. And the only reason it's 90 days is because we're going to find you a buyer in the first 30 to 40 tops, and then we need to build in some time to get it closed. If agents are asking you for 6 months of your time, I would be skeptical of that, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Because if you and I make the right decision tonight, A, it doesn't take that long. It takes 2 weeks to sell a house. And B, you're setting up a contentious relationship. I would rather build our relationship in partnership, tell you the truth from the start, and offer you 60 days of my marketing time with a potential for a 30-day extension for extenuating circumstances to get the job done. I would turn the tables on that, change the conversation, change the industry. We are all so programmed. Our industry has gotten so programmed. Can you tell this is like a soapbox for me? I'm sorry about that. Our industry has gotten so programmed to going in and begging for the listing, and then praying that they won't say anything about our 6% commission in our 6 month period of time. I think we have it wrong. I think instead, you need to take control of that time period. You need to go in and offer how long you're willing to work for them. Because if it's not done in 60 days, guys, guess what? I'm not interested in that seller anymore, because they're clearly not paying attention to the market. Because in 60 days, I'm already on my 3rd price reduction.
Okay, all right. So you're saying you're okay with doing that as long as you're in agreement on where it's priced. Because if they're way over where they should be priced, then you're going to be wasting time.
Yes, exactly right. And I realize, and I didn't 100% answer your question, because you got one of my buttons, right? And so the real answer to your question is, that's always up to you, right? About period of time. If you think you can get the job done in a shorter period of time based on the decisions they're making, then absolutely go from 6 to 4, or 4 to 3 months, or whatever. My point is, what if that question didn't ever have to come up because you actually addressed it proactively? Remember John Maxwell this morning talked about confidence? You need to build that confidence muscle to do what I just said. You've got to be 120% in that confidence zone to say, here's the time period I will offer you based on the information that we just discussed. But I think it's a winner. I'm going to keep promoting it. All right, guys. I'm going to put everyone out of their misery. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you later at 4:30, and we'll, if you have any questions, just shoot them to me via text or email. I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Rick.
Sure thing. See you soon.
Thank you.